Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome you all to the fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host. So now I want to introduce you to Wendy Marx, who is our guest today. And as all of you know, we're going to be talking today about how to brand yourself in a changed world. Wendy's a marketing and branding authority who's sought after for her ability to turn virtually unknown people into brands of distinction. As a founder and president of Thriving at 50 Plus, her coaching program is designed to help baby boomers discover their point of differentiation and then rebrand and retool themselves to a more rewarding second act. Wendy's had 30 years of experience in marketing, journalism, public relations, and counseling, and her programs provide a unique mix of marketing and PR savvy blended with psychological wisdom. She'll take you from the stage of uncertainty to assuredness, confidence, and success. She holds a W, an MS in journalism, and an MBA in marketing. Her articles have appeared in Fast Company, JobHunt.org, Advertising Age, and the New York Times, and others. And she's author of the book Thriving at 50 Plus, The 7 Principles to Rebrand and Reinvent Yourself. You know, I've learned about Wendy because she had an article in Next Avenue. And for those of you who don't know about Next Avenue, it's PBS network, really, that's been around for a number of years now that has really terrific articles about second half of life. And I read her work, and then she and I spoke, and I've gotten her book. And I must say, Wendy, I know we haven't talked for a little while now, but I've read your book, and it's very concise and clear and really helpful. So I want to recommend it to people. But I think we're going to get a lot of what Wendy has in the book today too. So let's get going. And if you could, as we start now, Wendy, tell us what got you interested in kind of morphing yourself into what you're doing now, because I know you've been rebranding yourself for these last 30 years.
Well, thank you, Dory. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm really excited to be with everybody today. I'd like to say, actually, that I'm a poster child for reinvention and rebranding. I'm actually on my 5th rebranding and reinvention, and as Dory mentioned, I've been everything from a social worker to a journalist to a marketer to a PR agency owner. And I'm now, in a way, returning to my roots because I've always loved personal branding and actually did some of that in my longtime PR business, and am now focusing exclusively on being a coach to people who want to rebrand and reinvent themselves, particularly at 50 plus. When it's not always as easy as it might have been when we were all younger.
Great. And so, you know, you've been changing yourself and rebranding yourself over these years, but how has the world changed today when it comes to people 50 plus?
We're in a really different world, really for everybody. Unfortunately, today there's no job security. We have record unemployment. And unfortunately, for people 50 plus, age discrimination is even worse. In fact, there was a meme that was circulating for a while, #Grandma Killer. So it's really not been a very forgiving world for people 50 plus. And then to top it off, we're all locked behind plexiglass, wearing masks 6 feet away or more. We're either stuck at home, working from home, and so much of our life now has gone online as opposed to just meeting people out and about. And as a result of that, it's very easy to become disengaged, to become out of mind of people, and to ultimately feel a bit lonely. So it hasn't been necessarily an easy time.
I think it's been a very, very challenging time. So what can people do to stand out? I mean, how do you think about branding in this world today then? We have ageism. We also have COVID-19. What are the things that people need to be aware of in order to differentiate themselves and be noticed in the world?
I actually think, Dory, that despite everything that's going on that makes it so difficult, it's actually a terrific opportunity for people to brand themselves. And by brand themselves, I mean to show their value and show how they can help. And the reason it's a good time is there's a few reasons. One is there's fewer gatekeepers today. It's easier if you want to reach out and talk to somebody. It's easier to get in touch, particularly with so many people working from home. Overall, also because of that same reason, people seem to be more accessible. And by branding yourself, it makes you more visible, and it gives people a reason to want to know more about you. It gives you some panache that you might not have had otherwise.
It's interesting to think about sort of the silver lining, I guess, of it being a virtual world more now, that there's more opportunities. I hadn't really thought about it that way, so it's interesting. But, before we go further, it might be good to, for you to define terms. Like, what is a personal brand? What do you mean by that?
I love this quote that's attributed to Jeff Bezos of Amazon, that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. The fact is that a lot of people might say, oh, what do I need a personal brand for? But in fact, you have one. People are forming a perception about you, whether you like it or not. And this other quote that I really like is from Tom Peters. He's wrote an article in 1998 in Fast Company that kind of kicked off the personal branding trend. And what he said is that if you're in business today, your job, your most important job, job one, is to be head marketer for a brand called you.
So it's interesting. So do you think that people need to think about their personal brand just in general, whether we want to still work or just sort of how we present ourselves to the world?
I do think that it's very important because, as I say on this one slide, which is called the gist, and this is the slide, if you're going to remember anything today, this is the one to remember, that if you don't go and brand yourself, somebody else will. The great thing about branding is it allows you to direct your life so that you're not a passive onlooker. You're the one in control and steering your life.
So for yourself, if you don't mind me asking you a personal question, you've gone from social worker, journalist, the MBA, rebranding expert. What have been some of the things that you've kind of learned along the way, or that, I don't know if you learned sort of through things that you did or didn't do that helped you appreciate the importance of branding?
I learned that, for one, I love that question, Dory. And one of the things that I learned is that it is definitely possible to reinvent and rebrand yourself, that what you were doesn't have to be what you'll always be. But what I found is that it's important to take some of what you were and carry that forward. So, for example, as Dorian mentioned, I was a newspaper reporter. I have good journalistic skills, and I've been able to carry that along and feature that in all of my reinventions. So don't think if you're reinventing and rebranding that it's a clean slate. You're adding to, enhancing things that you did. You also might at the same time want to subtract something that you did that really didn't get you anywhere. But it's an incremental approach, and that's what I've found. And each time I rebrand myself, I feel that I'm getting more where I want to be. You never fully get to where you want to be, but I feel like I'm approaching it.
So it sounds like, and what it makes me think of, and when I was reading your book, that, in a sense, by being more conscious and intentional, it's part of the process of becoming more of who we are, more authentic, more whole in some ways by both rebranding but figuring out what to let go of and what to hold on to, as we move forward in life. So I kind of like that idea that I think you're sharing here. So what led to writing the book? And then we'll get into sort of what some of the principles are about rebranding. But how does this whole branding thing relate to your book? And what led you to decide to write this book?
I've actually always wanted to write a book. And I thought when I would think about writing a book, I would think about doing something PR or marketing related. And what happened was that a Georgetown University professor that I got to know online reached out to me because he runs a book writing program. And he asked me if I knew of any recent college graduates who'd want to join this program. And I, in turn, said I didn't, but if he would consider a, quote, mature student. And before I knew it, I was actually part of a book writing program that he runs. But he runs it online, and it was an excellent program. And as part of that, and in thinking about what I would want to write about, I realized that I love and I've always loved the whole idea of branding. And it's something that I did with my PR clients. And I realized that people 50 plus are not like the millennials, necessarily natural branders, and yet it's so important. And I thought that I could really help people with this book. And in turn, the book led to my own reinvention. So I wrote a book about reinvention while I was reinventing myself and started my new coaching service.
It's a beautiful example of how a book can become the business card, in a sense, part of that rebranding and marketing effort to move in a different direction. So it's like you walk the talk of that. So I have a couple of questions from Maria from Everett, which I think feed right into what I think would be helpful to share. And I know that you have a slide on it, which is, she says she's changing her career and she has no idea how to begin to rebrand herself, how to market herself. So maybe you can talk about that, because I know in your book you talk about these 7 principles to reinvent and rebrand. So this may be a really good time to help the listeners know a little about your approach.
Yes, and I'm just going to give myself a little plug for my book, and when you get the slide, there's one slide here where I have a link where you can check out the book. And I'm so proud that I have all 5-star reviews for my book on Amazon. And as Dory was just saying, my book talks about 7 principles. And they go from your attitude, having a growth mindset, through storytelling, personal branding, is actually one of my 7 principles. But there's a process that I talk about in how to rebrand and reinvent yourself in my book. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You need to go through the steps and the stage, but you will get there. And I also have in the book a number of examples of people who have successfully reinvented and rebranded themselves. And their stories should shed light on the process for you.
Can you mention a little more about the 7 principles so people have an idea of sort of what those principles are? And I know at some point, while we're still talking, you'll be able to elaborate on it, but I think it might be helpful if people just kind of knew what you include in those 7 principles.
Sure. I'm going to do this briefly because 7 is a lot to go through. But, for example, one is having a growth mindset. And by having a growth mindset, a researcher and psychologist, Carol Dweck, has distinguished between a fixed and a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset don't change. They're so tied to what they've been, and they're really afraid of change. People with a growth mindset are constantly changing and evolving, and that's really a key, that you're not tied to what you have been. You always want to tweak, learn something new. And not only is that a great attitude to have, but it really keeps you on your toes. It gives you a reason to live and to have a lot of accomplishments. So that's one of my 7 principles. I'll talk about one other, which is storytelling. And storytelling is very important because we all tell ourselves stories about ourselves. And you want to tell a story with your reinvention and rebranding that's coherent, compelling, that people can understand and that you can understand. And the story helps you integrate the change, what you're going through, and also helps people relate to what you're doing. And as I mentioned before, it's important to tie what you were to what you're becoming or want to be. Otherwise, there's not a connection, and it's very difficult to tell the story.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think part of one of the things that I think is helpful in your book, and maybe helpful for the listeners to be aware of, is that in each of the 7 principles, Wendy talks a bit about the research and about ways to think about it. And I know I'm really influenced by the work of thinking, just in my coaching work and therapy work, of the idea of the growth versus the fixed mindset and the storytelling. I mean, so often we have stories that hinder us about who we are, what we can do. And, part of what I think is helpful is Wendy sort of focuses in on it to think about how the talking about yourself and how you present yourself is so important for people. So I think that's helpful. Maybe we can come back to some more examples as we go along, but I know you also have 5 key personal branding strategies, and maybe you can mention that for people.
Sure. I just want to say I'm so glad, Dory, that you mentioned about telling a story that can hinder us, because I think that is so important, that we can get trapped into thinking we're one way when we really can change, but we're just so locked into this old story about ourselves. So I'm really delighted that you mentioned that. Moving on to these personal branding strategies, there are 5 key strategies to rebrand yourself. And it's introspection, creating your brand, packaging your brand, humanizing it, and delivering it. And I thought, if that's okay, Dory, that I'd briefly walk the attendees, the audience, through those, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think that'd be great.
All right. So the first one that I mentioned is introspection. And I think people sometimes think that you sit on a couch, you ruminate, you go, who am I? What should I become? Well, that is not really effective. To change, you need to do. You need to act. And one good way to start is to ask 4 to 6 people, friends, colleagues, how they would describe you in a few words. This will give you a quick snapshot of how people think of you and if their perceptions match how you think about yourself. It's also helpful to do a skills inventory. Look at both your hard skills, and those are skills that are associated with a job, such as accounting or computer skills, versus soft skills, which are interpersonal skills. And see where there are gaps. Are there some skills that you really need to go where you'd like to go next? And then you want to look at how you create your brand. And part of this is defining your values, your vision, your mission, what you stand for, what you want to be. For example, in my new business, my purpose is to help people 50 plus get unstuck in their careers and find more meaning and financial success. So you want to be able to have a clear statement of what your mission is along with your value vision. You then want to think about creating an elevator pitch. Think of it when you go to a networking event or even a cocktail party. People ask what you do. You want to have a pithy, snappy 20 to 30 second statement that summarizes what you're about. You want to be engaging. You want to be relevant. And this is something that you can also use in social media profiles, on a website. And you also want to have something that gets people's attention. For example, let's say you have a service that's so easy to do, takes no time at all. Well, you might say this is as easy to do or takes as little time as it would to make a cup of coffee. That gives people a sense, gee, this is so simple, why don't I check it out? So that's what you want to do. You want to engage people in what you're doing.
Can you share what your elevator speech is?
Mine is, that's a good question.
I'm catching you off.
Mine is still a work in progress. I'll leave it at.
So it's not necessarily easy to come up with an elevator speech, but yeah.
No, it really isn't. And if I were to do one, and as I said, mine is still kind of a work in progress, but I would say that I am passionate about making or helping people at 50 plus have more rewarding lives and careers, and that I've come to this point because I've been in the shoes of people who want to change at this point in their life. I know what it means. I know what it's about. I know how difficult it is to get unstuck, and I help people in my business get them unstuck and take them to a better place, a more successful, thriving place. So that's a work in progress, but it gives you some idea.
That gives people a nice sense of how, you're trying to do the things you were just saying about, trying to be brief, specific, engaging, relevant, consistent. So it's a process, just as you say, and it can change constantly, I think.
Yes, and you want to continue to practice it and perfect it.
Right.
And as far as delivering your brand, in addition to having the elevator pitch, it's very helpful to focus on a content niche so that you're seen as an industry expert. So for my new business now, I'm writing and focusing on reinvention. I'm actually doing interviews with people who have successfully reinvented themselves, so that if anybody on this call has a great reinvention story, I'd love to hear it and interview you. And my contact information will be at the end of the slides. And that's a wonderful way, by focusing on a particular niche, to get known in a particular area. If you keep focusing on that niche, people will start associating you with that. Hey, she's the person who does whatever. You also want to be sure to evaluate how you're doing. Everything we've been saying today is not cast in stone. You want to be flexible, be able to pivot if necessary.
I think that's all really important advice of becoming, basically what you're talking about is how to become a thought leader, so people will turn to you and associate you with the topic that's important to them. I think this last slide and what you've just said relates to a question that Christine from Ohio has asked. She says, and you sort of comment on it, but maybe elaborate on it. Through your work, have you found that older people still tend to define themselves through their titles or their former titles, and or through their roles and responsibilities, rather than as the value that you can present in your reinvention? And how do you help with that?
I can't underscore that enough. That was a fantastic question. And yes. I find that so many people after a certain age, when I put myself in here, certainly over 50, over 55, I find that people think of themselves as their accomplishments, their resume, what titles they've had, the roles that they've played, rather than what they're passionate about, what benefits they bring to somebody else. They don't think as marketers. They just think of themselves as a resume. And a resume is not meant to be engaging. And you want to be so engaging and compelling when you're branding yourself. So thank you for asking that question.
So what are ways that people can be more compelling? I know you have a slide about inspiration. Where can people look, and what can people learn about, how to present themselves in a more exciting way, or to think about, what they have to offer in this reinvention?
I do have this one slide, just like you said, Dory, to give people a little inspiration. This is one that I don't know the person. I found her on LinkedIn. She's a creative director at an ad agency, and she has so much personality and spunk that you just want to get to know her. She says on her LinkedIn, I love selling brands. I hate selling myself. So here's 6 quick things about me and my work. In, out, nobody gets hurt. And then she goes on to say that she's created campaigns for more iconic brands than you can shake an iPhone at. So it's clever, it's compelling, it's engaging. Now, certainly, she has one personality. We all have different personalities. You want it to reflect your personality, which means you're not writing an essay. You're not talking as if you were to give a formal speech. You want people to know what distinguishes you, what gets your heart on fire, sets you on fire, gets you excited. And I think it comes down to, were you to just meet somebody in a personal relationship as opposed to talking about our careers or work, and you want to share a story or two about yourself that makes somebody understand what you're about. So think of it as a way to get people to want to know more about you. That's really what this is all about.
I think that is really important advice of how to, because basically when you're rebranding yourself, we're selling ourselves, not necessarily a product. It may be a product too, like, you have your book and all, but you're selling yourself, just using that as an example, as a thought expert in this area of rebranding. And so, and people aren't always used to this idea of having to market themselves. So I wonder if there's some suggestions on that.
Sure. It doesn't necessarily come easy. And I find that with baby boomers, and as I mentioned, I'm a baby boomer, it's more difficult. We're almost told growing up, or when we grew up, you shouldn't be talking about yourself. Yet, in fact, the only way people know what you're about is if you do talk about yourself. But you don't do it in a way where you're pumping yourself up and bloviating and bragging. You do it in a way that you're adding value and you're indicating that you're here to help. So I have here this next slide for those who are looking at the slide, some other tips. And one tip is to be a giver, not a taker. People respond to people who are gracious, who are generous, and are giving. And it's not helpful to go to somebody and ask. And if you give, oftentimes you end up getting back a lot more than you gave. It's also helpful to think about taking a course if you find that your skills are short in one area. For example, I am what I call a video phobe. I don't like doing videos, but I know they're so important. So I finally just recently signed up to take a video class online, and I'm starting it on Friday. And I bit the bullet and I said I would do it. So there's no reason today. There's so many courses. Most of them are not particularly costly. And there's a lot of free courses as well. Another good thing to do is to what I call warming up old contacts. We all have a lot of connections, and a lot of them we probably haven't talked to these people in several years. And it's helpful sometimes to go back to some of these people, let them know you're thinking about them, that you just wanted to say hello, hope they're doing well, particularly in this time that we're all going through. And that's an easy way to reconnect with people that you might want to connect with. It's also a great time to create new contacts because, as I said, people are more accessible. So go out to people that you'd like to meet and reach out and comment. You might want to, if you read an article, let's say they wrote, let them know how terrific the article was, what it meant to you. Something that's personal. So you're not just saying, hi, hey, I want to connect with you type of thing. So that's just some things that you might think about doing.
Those are all good suggestions. What about the use of social media? What's your sense of that? What aspects of it? How should people, what kind of strategies should people have about use of social media?
Social media is an excellent way to get your brand across. And there's, as you know, a number of social media channels. It's hard to be an expert and to be diligent on all of them. I personally am on all of them, but I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn. I find they work well for me. You may find others work better for you. And with social media, as I mentioned before, you want to be consistent. So if I have a picture on one social media channel, use the same one or one that's very similar on another channel. You've probably had the experience. You see somebody on one social media platform, they look one way, and they look 20 years younger on another one, and you're wondering, who is this person? Don't be afraid to look yourself. And another thing with social media is you want to be consistent. There's no point in being on these channels if you're not doing things, if you're not commenting, engaging with people, posting some content. And that, in turn, will help you get your brand out there. You also have a wonderful opportunity on social media to connect with people you'd like to connect with. Twitter makes it so simple. You can follow anybody you want. You can then start commenting and engaging with these people. What a great way to connect with somebody that in the past you might never have been able to connect with. So those are just a few things to keep in mind.
Well, I must say that's helpful to think about. I realize that I have different pictures on different sites, and I hadn't thought about the importance. I mean, I thought about it, but I haven't taken the time to make them consistent and all be the same. So now you've given me a new task for myself. What about, I'm just thinking about other tips. I mean, what other kind of, so social media is important, being a giver, not a taker, warm up old contacts, you said, create new ones. Volunteering, how might that be part of, sort of ways of rebranding? I mean, is that part of it, or what do you recommend about that?
Volunteering is very good if you're thinking, I'd like to start getting into a particular field, but you're not an expert in it, you're not even sure if you like it. Volunteering gives you a way, almost risk-free, to experience something new. And so many organizations today need help, and you can do a lot of this volunteering online, particularly now with COVID. It also gives you a way to sharpen skills. So let's say you're a would-be designer, but you want to improve your design skills. Organizations would love that, and you can perfect your skills by doing it and helping an organization. So look at it as a way to sharpen skills, to discover what you like or don't like, and also at the same time you're helping, you're giving back.
Well, that's some good advice on that, yeah. I'm back to Christine here in Ohio, who says, or asks, is your reticence about the use of video due to your observations of others who utilize it? Do you think more women shy away from this medium because of age bias and overemphasis on looks?
Another great question. I can speak for myself, and I have shied away from it because I don't like seeing myself on video. I don't think some people are so natural on camera, and for whatever reason I tend to freeze. So I don't feel I look my best, and then it becomes a vicious cycle because I don't feel like I look my best. So then I'm get intimidated and I freeze up even more. So that's my hang up. I think what you said in terms of older women, I think that and women in general, I think that women as opposed to men, and this is a gross generalization, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I think women are typically more conscious and concerned about looks, and certainly with the video, you feel like everybody is evaluating how you look, so that can make it difficult as well. And millennials, on the other hand, can't get enough of it for the most part, and they love to show what they're all about. But because so many people love video, and a lot of us are geared towards the visual, it is a skill that's important for all of us to know, which is why reluctantly, but forcing myself to try it and get into it.
I think I know it's a stereotype too, but it's part of the ageism, I think. Older men are often, people say they're distinguished. And older women, people say, look old and tired. And I know this is a stereotype, but it's still there, and it's part of the ageism stereotype, I think. And so I think it is important as we get older to just keep putting ourselves out there and saying this is what this new age looks like, rather than avoiding it, which I think is easy to do. So Jackie from Boughton asks, what do you mean about being lazy on LinkedIn?
What I meant about that, Jackie, is that it's easy to get up on LinkedIn or another social media channel and just do the very basics, which means you might occasionally like what somebody has said. You don't post regularly. You don't engage or comment on what other people are doing. You're just a presence there. And to make any of these social media platforms work for you, you need to do a little work yourself. You need to post things, comment on what other people are doing, and it's also helpful to join some groups, be part of those groups where you can also comment and engage. And feel that you're part of a community. You're not just simply have a profile up there.
So Jackie wanted me to just correct to say she's from Boston, not Boughton. There was an S missing from that, so sorry about that. Christine from Ohio comments about your comment about the video class. She says, good for you for taking a class. You should write about your adventure with testing this medium. I'm sure people would be interested, and she thanks you for your candor of for sharing that with us. So,
I just want to thank Christine. I just want to thank Christine for suggesting that. I love that suggestion, and I'm definitely going to do that. So thank you.
Great. So can you give us some inspiring examples? I know you have a number in your book, but can you just share with the listeners some inspiring examples of people who've rebranded themselves?
Sure. There's one person that I mention in my book, and she had been she actually headed up a counseling program at a university, had a very good position, and she'd been there for about 30 years. And with some changes within the university, she suddenly lost her job. Her whole identity was so tied up with her position that she was devastated, really in a funk, so depressed. But she did force herself to start getting out a bit. She had a wide network of people that she knew, and she networked with people. And she realized, and at first she tried to get a similar position to what she had before without any luck. And she realized that she didn't necessarily have to do what she had done before. And she also started doing some volunteer work just to get herself out of the house and to feel a little more alive. And it took her maybe a good year, but she finally decided she would, instead of trying to run a program, she would do some form of counseling herself, which is what her early training was. And she got a job as a counselor. That job she really did not enjoy. She then, through some networking, discovered a program where it's not so much counseling. It's a formal system where they help people be more productive in their lives. She had to get trained to do this, and she's now working for this organization where she has clients, and she's helping them be more effective in their in their lives, particularly at work. And she suddenly is a different person. She shed all that gloom that she felt. She almost feels a bit reborn. She's taken up some things she never did before. She's taking an art class and is truly enjoying her life now. And it wasn't an easy process, but it's one that she took herself successfully through. So that's just one example. I want to share, too, what I found in interviewing people and doing the research. I spent thousands of hours researching and writing my book. And what I've discovered is that people who do this successfully, for the most part, are terrific learners. They are never quite satisfied with where they are. They're happy with themselves, but they always want to learn something new. But by continuing to learn something new, it's a wonderful way to continue to reinvent, tweak yourself, because life doesn't stand still and we can't either.
I do think that's important, and it's one of the 7 principles to reinvent yourself and rebrand yourself that you have in the book. I know you picked 2 of them at the beginning. You mentioned about the growth mindset and the storytelling, and I know the willingness to learn is another. It might be helpful if you just mention the other of the 7 so people sort of know, or I have the book right in front of me. I can help with that too, but it might just be helpful for people to, because it's based on your research on kind of that these are 7 really important areas to think about.
Sure. In addition to the growth mindset that we talked about, my second principle is being uncomfortable. That part of this change is going through that process where you do feel out of sorts because you're in that in-between stage that's always uncomfortable. And then a willingness to learn, which I just mentioned. Finding your purpose, what really animates you and gives your life meaning. Storytelling, which we talked about, personal branding, which of course we've talked about, and social media, and mentoring. And mentoring actually cuts 2 ways. One is we can all be mentors to other people, which is very rewarding. And at the same time, we're never too old to have a mentor, somebody who can show us the way and give us a little hand-holding.
I think that's so important of the kind of the both directions of the mentoring, to be the mentor, the mentee, and just sort of the learning on both sides. I think that's great. So back to bringing things in from the listeners. So Jackie from Boston, commenting about about people and how they look, did say, I think some women do look tired, and excuse me, it's important to have a great haircut, be energetic, just as sort of a couple of things. And so she was offering that, and I so agree, and just wondered your thoughts on that too, Wendy.
I definitely agree. I think, one, how we look affects how we feel and sound. So that if we're looking our best, it's gonna help us have extra confidence and project in a way that we really want to. It also obviously makes you more engaging, and people are more interested in knowing you. And there's nothing worse than seeing somebody who looks slovenly. You feel, gee, they don't care about themselves. How will they care about me? So you want to look in a way that makes people want to engage and get to know you. And how you look is part of that. In a way, it's part of your overall branding.
And I really do agree with that. And I think it's so hard because sometimes, we want to say it doesn't matter, but first impressions really do matter. And, so we want to present ourselves at our best so that people, will then interact and engage and you can kind of go forward from that. But Elaine from Indianapolis says, what's your advice for keeping motivated as you rebrand yourself, since it's not a quick process and it's a challenge for some?
One thing, Elaine, that you might do is create a little informal group with a few friends of yours where you may be at different points in time, but to let them know what you're doing and you love their support and how can you in turn support them. They probably have a goal somewhere they want to get to. So in a way, you're forming your own support group, and that can be very motivating and helpful. Also set some small goals for yourself and give yourself a pat on the back each time you achieve one of these goals, because as you mentioned, it isn't a one-day process. It's a long process, but if you divide it into specific goals, then you feel you've made accomplishments along the way.
I think both are really, really helpful advice. So first of all, why don't you tell people about what you're offering as the giveaway, sort of sense, or partial giveaway in addition to the book for the best question. But tell people about what you're offering and about the handout that you have too. I think that would be helpful, and how to reach you.
All right, great. Let me just... As Dory just mentioned, there's a handout on personal branding that I thought you'd all find helpful, and you'll all be receiving a copy of that along with the slides. And I'm also excited to have a very special offer for you. It's a personal consult with me where you'll learn how to tell a more compelling story about yourself and your accomplishments. I have a link here. And anyone doing this will get specific deliverables, including a list of next steps and where you need to go. And I know it'll be very useful. And as I mentioned, there's a link in the slides for you to check out this very special offer.
And for those... go ahead. Yep, sorry.
I was going to say, to connect with me on the slides, I have my email, I have my Twitter and LinkedIn profiles, so please feel free to connect with me. If you have a reinvention story that you'd like to share with me, please do so. And if you'd like to learn how to tell a more compelling story and brand yourself in a way that's going to help you engage with the people you want to, please check out my personal offer. I just love being here today, Dory, so thank you so much.
Jackie says, thank you. Good pointers today. I've changed industries a few times too, and I'm struggling with this now. So it's very timely and relevant. Any other kind of tips that you have or other takeaways that you'd like people to have before they all leave today?
One thing that I'd like to mention, it's easy to think at a certain age that, and I think, again, this goes back to what Dory was saying about sometimes our own stories can trap us. It's sometimes easy at a certain age to think that we can't change, we're too old, no one wants us. That's not the case. It's so much of this is attitude, and you can change, and you need to start telling yourself a different story, and that really helps. Another thing is that we're here to keep getting better, is how I look at it. That we're never quite at the end point, but each day, each week, each year, we need to get a little better in terms of what we're doing. And that's why I love this whole reinvention and rebranding. It doesn't mean that you're a new person. It means you're a better person than what you were.
Great. That's a lovely way to think about it. So thank you. And I think we all feel that way. So I think it is. I mean, I think, your sense of attitude and mindset is just so important, because it's part of how we can too much be influenced by this ageism that's around and not believe in ourselves. So I want to just underscore what you said about, believing that we can do things and that we can have a different story. And I like, when you said things just keep trying to have that attitude that things can just keep getting better. We become more whole. So thank you. Any other gems you'd like to end with, Wendy?
I think I ended with my favorite gem. So I think.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you all, for being part of this. Stay well and safe in these really challenging times that we're in right now.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.